Sugar Dumplings, thank you so much for joining me for this video. I wanted to express some thoughts to you today about, I suppose, how to exist in the current reality and some ideas that I have that might help, and some of my personal feelings about living in this time and some of the things I'm seeing on the news and some of the things I'm seeing and living through with regard to the administration here, the government here, and the administration abroad, over there in America, namely. It's a tough time for a lot of people to be alive. There is an increasing amount of stress, depression, and anxiety related to living in these times, seeing what we're seeing, and experiencing just some of the tension and the political unrest. And you know, it's something that I touched on when Trump was very first elected. And I haven't really rolled back around to it. I rolled back around to it quite a bit more on my social media platforms. But I haven't really spoken about it in a dedicated video, and I suppose I wanted to just put a few things out there. We have been gradually witnessing a steady rise in nationalist and fascist sentiments in government, and increasingly loud rhetoric of that kind among the people, you know, in public opinion. And it's been really difficult to watch. I think it's specifically very difficult to watch for anyone who has a firm grip on history, particularly modern European history. There can be absolutely no doubt that a lot of the things that are going on right now are reminiscent of things that went on in the past, for instance, with Hitler's rise to power. And I don't care how many people say that it's inappropriate to compare the rise of Nazism in Germany in the 1930s to what's happening with Donald Trump now, or what's happening in the UK now with the referendum to leave Europe and the big hornet's nest that has kind of brought about. I don't care how many people say it's inappropriate. It is appropriate. It is actually appropriate. If you look at actually what happened at that point in history, you will see that there are parallels to be drawn, and it is important that we talk openly about the fact that those parallels can be drawn. And I really feel like anyone who's saying that it's not appropriate in some way, that it's disrespectful in some way, is trying to run away from the fact that it is appropriate wholly to have that discussion. So it can be deeply stressful for anyone who has had an interest in that particular area of history. And there are other times in history I can name too, where, you know, the same sorts of things have happened. There's nothing new except what's been forgotten, you know. These things have happened before. This is history repeating itself again. It can be worrying for those people, and it can be chilling to think about where this kind of rhetoric and this kind of emboldened fascism and nationalism can lead. But at the same time, you've also got 24-hour news coverage of it. You have got, you know, 24-hour access to, you know, a hyperactive social media world. And you've also got this experience that a lot of people are having now, where it really is down to the wire. Like, people are finding that their personal relationships are being affected. They're finding that their mental health and their emotional well-being is being affected. They're finding that they are having to pull away from people in their family or their friendship group when certain views have been shaken to the top within the fabric of those relationships, and people find themselves looking at each other completely at odds and finding that actually there is some really deep nastiness and toxicity that is coming to the top, that is being emboldened, that is being sanctioned by the administration, by the people in charge. And it's horrendous, and it's making people feel like they can't talk to each other anymore, and in some cases that they can't even be married to each other anymore. So people are really putting lines in the sand, and that's no simple, easy thing to do. That's something that is going to have far-reaching consequences, not only for someone's family generation or community generation, but the generations that follow. So it's a lot. It is a lot, and I know a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of people are suffering. They don't know what to do. And I'll just be completely honest from my point of view. I'm not going to go through the whole history of, you know, when I first sort of started to realise that we were experiencing the rise of this kind of rhetoric and these kinds of opinions and sentiments in the UK. I could point to a few situations that happened, a few terrorist situations. For example, Lee Rigby's murder was one, where I started to realise that we were coming to this point where a lot of the things I was hearing that were dangerously generalising whole groups of people and proposing extremely reactionary responses that would harm a great number of people were going from the streets to actually, you know, the Houses of Parliament, the people that actually run the shit on our behalf. And then I watched the rise of the street groups like the EDL, Britain First, that kind of thing. And I've watched this all intensely. It's not like I haven't been aware of it. It's not like it's something that, you know, I've only just sort of come into contact with and stuff. But I'll be honest with you that when Trump was elected and some of the things that I heard during the Trump campaign trail, and then some of the things that he brought into action very quickly after becoming president, etc., I have been in a state of what I would call perpetual shock. And I think that's where a lot of people are. I think a lot of people are actually just in fucking shock. I am in shock that Donald Trump ever got to the White House. It is a circus, frankly. I mean, it is ridiculous. But it is happening. It is real. It is what is going on. And I think that delayed shock can make a lot of people feel even worse and even more helpless and hopeless, because it is happening. It is something we need to deal with. It is something we need to respond to. And it's almost kind of strange because, and I've read quite a few think pieces and opinion pieces about this that are really interesting. It's almost like a cross between business as usual, like, you know, we still need to pay our rent on time, there's still sports on TV, but there's also at the very same time this dystopian, increasingly totalitarian, fucked up situation that's occurring before our very eyes. So it's odd because you could carry on just business as usual and you could pay it no mind in a lot of cases, or you could try to pay it no mind to the extent that you can and to the extent that it affects you or doesn't affect you. And even if Trump's policies and the rhetoric and the way that the public are responding does affect you quite greatly, you still can, to one extent or another, put your head in the sand and not choose to respond to a large extent. So, you know, I feel like I've been in perpetual shock, delayed, perpetual, I don't know what you call it, but I've been there, I am there, and it is chilling for me, very chilling. At the same time, obviously, I'm aware that I want to be in the world, I want to live as part of this world, I want to respond to this reality in a helpful way and in a way that helps me to make sense of it, not just for myself but for others who are way more affected by all of this than I am. And I'm affected, believe me, but way more affected than I am. It's been interesting for me to think that I've had some of the same thoughts and the same feelings and the same self-questioning that people would have had in Germany during the time when Hitler became Chancellor, and you're seeing these posters go up that are really just directly attacking Jews and using these hideous caricatures of Jews. You've got people on the trams and the buses and in the street sort of talking to each other about the other and about getting the other out and, you know, making the country great again and pure again and all this kind of thing. And that was very much the dialogue I was having with myself during the referendum campaign for Brexit. I think that it would be a completely different video to explain the parameters of that referendum and the innate racism that came with the vehement anti-immigration policy that was taken by the Brexiteers, the people who wanted to leave Europe. And a lot of it was based around that. There was a lot of information. There was a shitload of lies. It was unbelievable to watch. It was like, how can you even believe that? What the fuck? There was a lot of lies told about the EU, the role of the EU, the benefits of being within the EU. So that was really odd. Sorry, this light is, I don't know what's going on with this light. It's odd. You can kind of see me. It's okay, whatever. I like a ghost in a black wig. I won't go into the ins and outs of it all, but during that time, I had some very real talks with myself about how this is how people must have felt during the rise of Hitler and, you know, the black shirts being in the street and, you know, the smashing up Jewish businesses and that kind of thing. After Brexit happened, we saw a statistical rise in anti-Muslim crime across the City of London and across the UK. We saw a spike in racist crime, in crimes that could be categorised as hate crimes based on race or ethnicity. We saw mosques being graffitied, and synagogues being graffitied, and centres for Polish people and, you know, other people from the EU being graffitied with swastikas and that kind of thing. We saw really unpleasant attacks on people in the streets. We saw people reporting, black people in London reporting that they had never before experienced in public any kind of open racist attack, or they'd never felt targeted, and suddenly after Brexit happened, after that vote came in, they're getting on a bus and they're being called the N-word in broad fucking daylight in public in London. So again, yes, there are fucking parallels. There are parallels. And I'm not afraid to say that those parallels need to be drawn and they need to be talked about. And I found myself in this situation where I was thinking, wow, you know what? A lot of this really is just down to how ordinary people respond. When you find that there are MPs that are actually using old Nazi posters and changing them slightly. This actually happened during the referendum to leave Europe. They took an old Nazi poster and they switched it up slightly to make it look like a modern day depiction of immigrants swarming the UK. It was a Nazi poster and they used it in their campaign. They used the idea, they changed it slightly to make the people look modern and whatnot. When that is happening, when the people that are invested with the faith and the trust of people in the UK are doing stuff like that, and fuck knows why Nigel Farage and his band of merry wankers would ever be trusted with anything. I wouldn't trust them with a pot of hot tea. But when that kind of thing starts happening, and when you start to hear the most egregious apologist stuff coming from people that are literally entering and leaving the Houses of Parliament on a regular basis, you realise that it is down to you, it is down to the ordinary people to take a stand for what it is that they believe in and for what they think is right. And you do that through your everyday actions. You do that through how you carry yourself in the world, through how you respond to the needs within your community, through how you interact with people, through how you show people that you yourself personally as an individual do not advocate these things. You are not a part of that. You stand aside from that. And it is so much easier in so many cases to just be quiet. And that is why a lot of these videos go viral of somebody standing up against a racist on public transport or in a public place. That's why these videos go viral of just an ordinary person saying, you know, stop this, stop talking to her like that. That's why these videos go viral of somebody protecting a Muslim woman who's being attacked for wearing a hijab, that kind of thing. They go viral because we all know deep down, somewhere inside us, that it's easier to just shut the fuck up, to just look the other way, to just walk past and not do anything, not say anything, not make that change, not at least see if that person is okay, not at least, you know, rally round with other people and see if there's anything you can do. We all know that you have an easier day, technically anyway, you have an easier day if you put your head down and just get on with it. But morally, spiritually, you don't. Those people that take that stand, that speak up and speak out, they are people to whom we need to look up to when we feel like giving up, when we feel apathetic, when we feel like there's nothing that we can do and there's nothing that we are brave enough to do or feel moved enough to do because it's all just gone to shit. Those are the people we need to look to, the people that continue to make a difference or who see their chance to say no to something. The thing about the Trump administration and a lot of the rhetoric that's going on, and you know, now at the moment, at the time of making this, I'm thinking specifically about the separation of families that are being detained and deported, that kind of thing, which is just hideous. It's fucking hideous. Please don't write underneath my video trying to justify it, because there's no justification for that, okay? The thing about seeing an administration doing this and daily justifying this kind of thing and daily justifying the hateful legislation that they're trying to bring in against immigrants and against, you know, less fortunate people, against women, whatever, is that it emboldens those who want to be egregious or violent or domineering in public. It emboldens those who have hatred in their hearts, who want to feel that their hatred is justified and that their hatred is actually sanctioned by the law and it's sanctioned by government. It emboldens people, and that is why there was a massive spike in anti-Muslim crime and race crime after we Brexited, because the whole campaign was built on this sentiment of getting rid of the other, and of banding together in this tribal, very nationalistic way, where we said that we are one thing and everybody else is something else. And it was just extremely discriminatory, and it worked on a sense of superiority, and it worked on a sense of fear. It was very fear-mongering, and it was very scapegoating, and it emboldened people that want to go out and smash the shop windows of, you know, their person in the neighbourhood that is just running a convenience store, who happens to be from somewhere else, who happens to speak in a language they don't understand, who happens to wear clothing that looks different to them. It emboldens people who feel alienated, disenfranchised, and they feel like their life is lacking something. And no doubt their life probably is lacking something, but they have been convinced that the other is the reason for it. That person over there who's different is the reason for it. They're the person to blame. They're the person who's personally come in and twisted your life out of shape and meant that it couldn't have been what it was supposed to have been. If you can convince people of that, and then they feel emboldened, like their behaviour is sanctioned by the government, it's sanctioned by the administration, it's sanctioned by the mouthpiece of the government machine in some way, then you've got a recipe for disaster. You've got a recipe for people being harassed in the street, people being threatened, people being harmed. And at that point, it is down to every individual person to choose their response. It's no longer about this machine coming in and saying, no, this is the response we're going to adopt, because the machine is poisoned. You know, the poison is in the well, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to drink it or spit it out. When it comes to feeling hopeless, when it comes to feeling helpless, when it comes to not knowing what you can do to help with some of these things that are happening to yourself, your family, other people, whatever, you must focus more on what you can personally control, not on what you can't control. The more that you place focus on something that you cannot personally control, then the more you're going to feel powerless and helpless and hopeless. It's got to be about what you can do and what action you can take. That is where the true empowerment lies. If you feel like there is someone in your family or in your friendship group who's holding on to these views that are insidious, that are sanctioning the harming of people, the dehumanization of people, if you feel like you can talk to them and you can get somewhere with them and you can meet them where they are and you can have that conversation with them, by all means have that conversation with them. But I would recommend at the same time, don't let that be the hill that you die on. Think about what you are doing as somebody who doesn't agree with these policies. Think about what you can personally do as somebody who wants to make the point and take the stand. It is important sometimes in some situations and in some contexts to engage with people who do not agree with you and have the full-on opposite view to you. I think in some ways that can be important, and I think particularly it can be important to do that on behalf of people from marginalised groups that you don't belong to. You know, it's almost a way of deciding that you're going to step up and you're going to interface with that person and you're going to try and help them understand. And you're going to do that so that a person from a marginalised group doesn't feel like they have to step into the front line in front of you and have those conversations themselves, which can be extremely violating and very hurtful and damaging, right? So for instance, if you are a white person and you are in the midst of a discussion about racial inequality and you're finding that somebody is advocating, discrimination towards non-white people, yes, you could be placed perfectly, you could be perfectly poised to have that conversation with that individual if you are coming with the facts and if you are calm. I mean, you can be impassioned, but obviously you don't want to be so impassioned that you're going to be baited into behaving in a way that's out of alignment with your principles, blah, 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 blah. But basically you could be that perfect person, absolutely, no doubt, right? But don't let that be the hill that you die on. You've got to also think about what you're doing, because you might talk to somebody for 100 fucking hours and never change their opinion. You might talk to somebody who is just so engrossed in the idea that they are being somehow personally harmed by people who are taking away from their identity or their sense of self, to the point where it's okay for them to have their children snatched from their arms and not given back for a month. You might talk to someone for 100 hours who's like, well, they shouldn't have fucking tried to come here in the first place, even though they were running away from violence in the streets and gang wars, but never mind that. Shouldn't have come here in the first place, and they get what they get, and that's the end of it. And that obviously puts an incredible amount of stress and pressure on you being in that conversation that you may come out the end of with nothing in terms of a result, in terms of any worthwhile change. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have these discussions with loved ones or people in your community, but also remember that you cannot ultimately control other people's thoughts, behaviours, etc. And you can control what you do. You can control what you do with your time, what you do with your efforts, what you do with your energy, and what you do with your money. You can control how you personally choose to respond to things. So always remember to empower yourself in that sense. And I would say also that when it comes to being around people that have these views that are highly discriminatory and damaging and dangerous, that are talking about the dehumanization or the lessening of value of certain kinds of people, you do need to know when it's okay to walk away. You do need to know when it's okay to end that conversation, and you can put boundaries and barriers around yourself when it comes to those kinds of conversations. If you are a part of the stigmatized or marginalized group that you're discussing with somebody who is advocating for discriminatory legislation or treatment of the people within that group, you've got to have a breaking point. You've got to know that you can't keep talking to somebody like that for hours on end, because it's going to be harmful. It's going to take a massive energetic toll on you, and it is okay to acknowledge that. You do not have to be on the front lines all the time, whether that's in protest, whether that's in online activism, whether that's engaging with people in your community or online. You've got to know how to care for yourself and how to make sure you're not putting yourself in an overtly stressful situation for a long period of time where you are really arguing for your existence. You're arguing for your legitimacy as a fucking human being. And that's going to be something that's difficult for you to do on any kind of intense, long-term basis. So you've got to know when it's appropriate to walk away. And I think people have also got to know when it's appropriate to draw some boundaries around what you will and will not discuss with people that you spend frequent or consistent time with. For instance, there are some things that I do not talk about with some members of my family and some members of my friends' families, right? I don't want to get into those conversations. I've been lured into those conversations before. It has never ended well. It's always been extremely defensive and malicious on their side, actually, a lot of the time, because they feel attacked just by my very stance. I don't even have to say anything. They're already feeling attacked. And I do think it's because they know that they do not really have the information and the statistics and the resources to back up the things that they have been convinced to feel on a deeply emotional level. They've been duped into feeling these things about other people on an emotional level. That's where it is. And when they try to engage with somebody about it and try to justify it, they get very tangled up and they kind of fall all over themselves, because it is from an emotional place. And it is from a place of somehow feeling that there is a need within them that has not been met. There is a feeling of loss within them that on some level they have been convinced to see from some kind of nationalistic standpoint. And so I'm convinced that that's part of the reason that they do get very snotty and very defensive and very guarded, but even at the very beginning of any discussion I have with them. Anyway, I've made some decisions about things I'm not going to talk about with people that I see regularly, that I do want to have a relationship with. And believe me, I'm not one of those long-suffering people that's going to continue to have a relationship with somebody egregious, even if we do share DNA. I'm not going to do that. If somebody is in that point in their lives where they're just being destructive or abusive or toxic in some way, when their behaviour is set up that way, I'm not calling anyone a toxic person, so don't put words in my mouth, I wouldn't do that, but when someone's behaviour is so toxic that I can't be around it, I will walk away from the connection. I will. I'm not one of those people that convinces myself I need to stay and relentlessly experience the tidal waves of that. I'm not going to do that. But if there is someone that I want to keep in my life and I know that their opinions are very different from mine, and I'm thinking specifically about someone right now who I love dearly, but we just don't talk about certain things. I did not talk to this person once about the referendum to leave Europe. I did not want to. I know what their stance is. I don't need to have a discussion with them about it. I feel like I know where their stance is placed and why their stance is what it is. And I feel like nothing good can come of having that discussion. So I don't want to have that discussion. And they attempted to have that discussion with me once. And I said, that's going nowhere good. Let's move it along. You're allowed to do that. You are allowed to do that, especially if you are under their roof, if you are somehow under their dominion. if you are relying upon them financially, or if you are in any way in a situation where power play is involved and you feel like they want to go at you and really kind of go in on this particular topic in a way that is going to leave you inevitably on the back foot, and it's going to be very emotionally charged and all of that, you are allowed to put up a boundary around that. You do not have to enter into that. Sometimes if a person, for example, is pro-Trump and has a Make America Great Again baseball cap, if they know that you do not agree with Trump's policies and you are very upset that he is in the White House and you are in a state of constant perpetual shock at some of the bullshit that comes out of this guy's mouth and the things he's doing, then that person in your life who's wearing a MAGA hat might very well have a deep burning desire to get you to see their point of view. And that might end in a really uncomfortable, unpleasant way. It might kind of escalate into something that is deeply unpleasant, where you can feel that you're being personally attacked just for not being in agreement. And when things like Charlottesville happened, and I'm still not over that, I'm still not over that. What the fuck? When things like that happen, people that have advocated for this presidency and have, you know, pushed for it and gone to the rallies and, you know, Make America Great Again and all that shit, they're almost going to make a beeline for you in a way to justify their point of view. And it's very taxing. It's a lot of emotional stress and work on you to have to deal with that. And you don't have to deal with that. You can literally just say, you and I are never going to agree. I love you, and that's it. You know, you're going to need to back off. If that's what you feel you need to do, if that's what you feel you need to say. One thing I think that we do need to understand when we're having discussions with people that disagree with us is that we ourselves can put ourselves in a situation where we are emboldening racism and we are emboldening fascism. And I think that that's something that I kind of recognised as well. It's not just a case of like, okay, if the machinery of government are bringing in legislation that is dehumanising people, that is putting people in danger, that is taking away people's rights, etc., and seems to be placing a certain group of people on a pedestal while other people are getting crushed underfoot, then they are directly emboldening the racism that happens in the street. They are advocating what racists are doing in public places and in communities. Yes, that's true, but you, by the way that you respond to individual discussions and scenarios that you get yourself into, could also be emboldening racism. So I would rather shut a conversation down if I feel like we're not going to be having it on an equal footing. There's power play within the fabric of the interaction, and I know that it's about that person getting the upper hand and feeling satisfied within their belief system. So for instance, let's say that one of the parents of a friend of mine, I'm at their house and they want to have a discussion with me about how great Trump is for America, or how, you know, we're going to end up having a civil war against the Muslims here because they're culturally unfit to be here, or some shit like that. Then I would rather tap out of that conversation immediately, because I am not going to be able to have the caliber of interaction with this person, if indeed I have the energy and the desire to do so, which I don't always, to be honest, with that kind of rhetoric, but I do try to put myself up for it, and I do try to, you know, have a conversation with someone that I feel might be open to listening to a different perspective where possible. I feel I owe it. I feel I owe it to Muslims in the UK if we're having a discussion about that. I feel I owe it to people of colour, whatever. I feel I owe it to that group that we're discussing, right? Because I'm not a part of that group. I'm white, and as such, I feel I owe my time and energy to those conversations, where and when it's appropriate for me to have those conversations. So if I'm in a situation where I'm at someone's house, I'm under their roof, I might not necessarily know them that well, and they want to have this conversation with me and they want to push for this conversation, to me, I know that I'm going to be on the back foot. I am not going to feel like I can have the conversation in the way that I want to. So I'm in danger of emboldening them in their views if we have the conversation. So to me, it's actually much better to say, those views to me are repugnant. There's no point having the conversation with me, mate. There's no point. Like, let's just move on to something else, and then I will actually change the subject. Because to me, that's a way of saying, everything that you're about to say just disgusts me. I'm not going to have the discussion, because I know that we're going to have the discussion in a way where you're going to have the majority of the floor. I'm not going to feel I can say what I need to say and what I want to say and what I want you to hear. So it's going to be a situation where you may end up feeling emboldened in your views because you know you can shout me down and you know you can have your way, and the conversation will end with you having the last word and taking the floor up and taking the space up, and it may almost lead to an emboldening of your views, and I don't want to do that. So that's another reason why I might shut a conversation down. Anyway, I know everyone's going to have a different point of view when it comes to engaging people that have, you know, the directly opposite view, and that's okay, that's fine. But what I would say is don't make that the hill that you're going to die on. Think about your activism, think about what you are doing to better the situations for those people who are being stigmatized, marginalized, who are having funding taken away from them, who are very fearful of what is being passed through the Senate right now, all that kind of thing. And really ask yourself, you know, how am I using my time? How am I investing my energy? How am I investing any funds that I have? How am I acting in alignment with my own beliefs? How am I using my life and the way that I spend my time, you know, as an advocation for the stuff that I believe in? You've got to understand what you need to be able to have a good day. You've got to understand what you need to be able to feel healthy. You've got to be able to be providing yourself with at least some of those things. I know it's not easy. I know it's not always possible, but you've got to think about self-care in terms of what you can achieve and what is possible, and do just even a little bit more of that. I know that so many people struggle to get access to decent healthcare. I know that so many people are in a position where they feel they don't have the emotional support or the community infrastructure around them. I know that a lot of people are dealing with trauma, and a lot of people are traumatized by what's happening, by what they're looking at, by what they're watching from the White House, by what they're watching from this administration. And I know that it's a struggle as well for people in other places. There's definitely struggles going on in the UK related to this kind of thing too. I know it's not necessarily possible to get 10 out of 10 self-care and 10 out of 10, you know, mental and emotional and physical well-being every day. I totally get that. But I think it's got to be about what you can do, and it's got to be about the extent to which you are willing to make small, steady improvements in any way that you can. It's being honest with yourself about the things you're doing that are not doing you any favours. And one of these things is the amount that you access the news about what's happening. Now, I know that there are some people in the spiritual community who suggest that you do not absorb any news whatsoever, that you do not imbibe the news at all. I would say that that is a very bad idea. I would say that shutting ourselves away from what's happening is leaning into a layer of apathy and a style of apathy, which is exactly what these people want. It's exactly what people with fascist and nationalist sentiments want. It's exactly what the government wants. So I think we need to be really careful that we are not shying away, and we need to be careful that we are not wasting our spiritual perception and our spiritual passion on just kind of hiding and putting the blinkers on and pretending that things aren't happening. We can do so much more good out there in the world than we can do hiding away under a blanket, you know, just basically saying, tap me on the shoulder when it's over, you know, I'm done. I don't want to do that. I know that loads of people who watch my channel don't want to do that either. I know that sometimes it feels like that's what you want to do, and that's what I want to do too. But I do not feel like that is the appropriate way forward. And I feel like it is so... It comes from such a point of privilege. Now, that's not to say that you should have the news on 24/7. It's not to say that you should be following this stuff on social media all the time. We need to find a way to ingest it, to understand it, and to work with it and utilise it as a tool for making decisions about what we are going to do next and what is most important for us to actually achieve. And there are lots of different ways that you can do that. You can find so many different, you know, lists of suggestions and things about this online, different ways that people have found to clean up their feeds so that, for example, you know, on Twitter, they might have a sort of psycho-spiritual and witchy feed, and then they might have a news and current affairs feed, so they can minimise the amount that they see the news and current affairs for the day until they actually want to. There are people that have gotten rid of the news apps on their phone, and they just check the news twice a day from the sources that they want to check the news from the various sources. I don't recommend just one, but like a number of sources that they want to check the news from, and then for the rest of the day, they do not engage with it. If they see an article on their Facebook feed or their phone and they want to click on it and open it, they won't. They will either save it for whenever they're next checking the news, or they will have the strength to scroll past it because they know that they cannot be up to their neck in that stuff all the time, every day. You know, it causes actually a lot of stress and anxiety, and it makes you distracted from what you actually want to do in terms of actions and in terms of response to what's happening. I think that some people might actually feel encouraged to move entirely away from imbibing any news and any information about what's happening with anything, actually because of the Trump administration. Trump actually very recently, at the time of making this video, said what you are seeing and reading is not what's happening. In other words, none of the news is the truth. He's saying only I am the truth. I am the mouthpiece. I am the only source of truth and facts. What I say goes. Anything else is a mistruth. Anything else is a lie. Anything else is leading you down the garden path away from the truth and the light and the righteousness that is me. This is totalitarian, this is dystopian, this is Orwellian. And if there's anyone out there watching this that doesn't understand what Orwellian means at this point, you need to get yourself a copy of 1984. You need to have a look at the definition of the word Orwellian. You know, this is really straight from the history books. This idea that like the media machine is just a pack of lying hounds, don't listen to anything they say, only what comes from me can be the way, the truth and the light. I see what this person is doing. Do not convince yourself that that is anything like the truth. You have got to trust your own discernment. You've got to believe that you do not need to be spoon-fed your information and your news from one person who blatantly wants to twist everything to his own agenda. You have got to believe that you can go out there and you can discern from the resources at your disposal what is actually going on. When somebody says you can't trust anything and you can't trust anyone except for me, if you were in a personal relationship with somebody like that, you would probably be able to recognize it as a form of emotional abuse, you know, as abusive, as calculating, as toxic behavior. And you've got to recognize it on a political level as well. You've got to recognize when that is deeply abusive and troubling, and when it is going to lead to some really shady shit, like the shit that we've seen in the past, that we would rather not attribute anytime soon to anywhere in the world that we consider to be the free world or the democratic world. I mean, come on, these words are just words if we're going to convince ourselves that no news is true and that there is nothing that we can listen to except for this guy. Think about how you are absorbing your news, how you are reading about it, how you're getting it into yourself, and how you're using it, how you are actually using it to make decisions about what comes next, to plan, to strategize, to think about how you want to respond. And so that puts you in an empowering position. First of all, you are imbibing the news in a way that feels right for you, in a way that feels empowering for you, and in a way that you are choosing to then go on and use in some way to craft your response to what is happening. That's the most empowering way, I think, to watch the news and imbibe the news. And also to talk with each other about it, to kind of bolster each other in what our responses are going to be and what our plan of action is, etc., that kind of thing. And also to extend empathy and sympathy where needed to groups that are affected by things that are going on in the news. Those kinds of things are empowering. Don't find yourself in this endless news-related scroll hole where you are just piling it on in a way that is very panic-inducing, anxiety-inducing, not making you feel good. Obviously, none of this news necessarily makes you feel good, but you know what I mean. Like, don't do that to yourself. Don't put yourself into this stasis where you're locked in the headlights like a rabbit, terrified, and you're not really doing anything with any of the news that you're imbibing. You're not doing anything with any of that information. You do not feel active, you feel passive, and you feel scared, and you feel powerless. The more that you do that to yourself, the more that you're going to be inclined to just shut the news off completely. And I don't think we can afford to do that as spiritual people or people on any kind of mystical or psycho-spiritual journey. We've got to be in the world. You know, the people that are warriors for the planet right now, that are doing things for Mother Earth to reverse some of the terrible damage that we've done, those people are on a spiritual journey, but they're not cut off from what's going on in reality. They're in it, they're part of it, they're dealing with it actively. Those people are valuable because, of course, it's tempting to just scroll on by and pretend it's not happening and protect ourselves from it because it's saddening to us. But we need those people who are prepared to make the videos, who are prepared to create the innovative designs that are going to help reverse the, you know, the tide of toxicity that we've pushed out into the environment. We need people that are going to be in it, that are going to be on that battlefield. And it's the exact same with anything that's going on in any kind of community, with any kind of scenario, with any kind of legislation, with any kind of activism. We need those people who have pulled the blanket off from over their heads and said to themselves, just because I'm spiritual and highly sensitive, just because I'm mystical, just because I'm a witch, just because I have this going on, doesn't mean I don't exist here, and it doesn't mean I don't belong here, and it certainly doesn't mean I can't do any good here. I do exist here, I do belong here, and I can do good here, and it's my duty to do so. I think that a lot of the dialogue that goes on in the spiritual community is actually centered on identifying with weakness. And I'm not trying to be a bitch by saying this. I'm not trying to be deliberately edgy or controversial by saying this. I genuinely think that it is true, and I think it's turned up in my perspective as well over the years. I think that we place a lot of emphasis on how we're going to protect ourselves from what's going on out there and how we're going to live in the world and deal with things. And don't get me wrong, that's what this video is about. That's what I'm talking about right now. I am talking about that right now. But I think that the dialogue can very dangerously and frequently veer into this perspective of getting away from it, cutting off from it, shutting it down, protecting ourselves from it by stepping outside of it. Why would we do that? What is the point in any of our spiritual work if we're not going to do something with it? And that's really where I end up most of the time. I think to myself, why are we, it's almost like we're claiming that spiritual work, spiritual perception and spiritual experiences make you so thin-skinned that you actually can't grab a hold of a situation and do something with it, that you cannot take action, that you cannot live both feet in the world and be a part of this planet. And if that's what we're saying about ritual and spellcraft and meditation and retreats and stuff like that, I don't want any part of that stuff anymore. Let's stop doing that. Let's stop doing that stuff completely if we're saying that it renders us incapable of actually doing any good in the world and taking a stand for anything in the world. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that you have got to understand the difference between taking a healthy break, really for your well-being, and then running away from something completely. Think about how you are showing your community, your family, the world at large, what you believe in and what you advocate for. I think that it's really interesting to me how many people asked what the point was in us opposing Trump's visit, protesting against him. It was like, well, he's still coming anyway, you know, he's the guest of Theresa May, he's going to visit the Queen. What's the point in having this massive protest in the UK? You know what? There's a bunch of reasons why, but one of the ones that I think is so important is to show solidarity with anyone affected by any of his rhetoric, anything he said, any of the legislation he's pushing through. It's to show that we aren't just going to quietly let somebody like this turn up and not have something to say about it. It's to extend a hand across the pond and to extend a hand to each other. It's to say that we are in solidarity with each other, and that is very important for people to see. People need to see that. They need to see that. They need to feel moved by that. They need to feel a sense of hope because of that. Every single day we need to recognise that we have an incredible power to show somebody who might feel fearful of being out on the street, who might be fearful of being marginalised, that we are there for them, that we see them, that we recognise them as an equal. We have the ability to do that by something just as simple as opening the door for somebody, smiling at them and saying, hey, have a great day. You know, we have the ability to do that in all kinds of little ways that we might feel are insignificant or silly or not worth bothering with or thinking about. We might be walking around with our heads down, not contributing to anybody else's sense of safety, worthiness or belonging. Or we can decide that we're going to take every single opportunity we can to make somebody feel seen and honoured who may not feel seen and honoured at this incredibly fucking trying time in our human history. We have to think about every single time we have the power to make any kind of fucking difference to anyone. We have to think about every single time we have the power to put out an energy of positivity, love and openness versus putting out an energy that is closed and fearful and hopeless and helpless or even angry or defensive. Never ever tell yourself that kindness doesn't make a difference. Never ever tell yourself that your energy that you carry with you into the world doesn't make a difference to somebody who really desperately needs it in that moment. Whether they need it because they're struggling with their mental well-being, whether they need it because they feel increasingly that they belong in a country that doesn't want them and that doesn't value them, whether they have just had some really shitty news or a stroke of really bad luck and you're the person that comes along and makes them feel seen and makes them feel heard and appreciated in a particular moment. It doesn't matter. Never tell yourself you don't have that power. Form community online, form community in the physical, go towards people that have your shared goals and your shared values. Be of service in a way that connects you with others and see what you can achieve as a group. If you feel like you're not really sure at this point what you can do on your own, if you feel like you are not necessarily strong enough to do something on your own, but you would like to operate as part of a team, as part of a group, as part of some kind of group initiative or group activism, whether it's online, whether it's physical, whether it's both, don't tell yourself you can't do that. Really move towards that if you feel that that's what you can do. Be concerned for other people as well as for yourself. Don't just think about how the current situation affects you and how certain pieces of legislation may affect you. Think also about the stuff that really actually doesn't have a discernible, personal, intimate effect on you, but really, really affects another group of people, and fight for them as well as for yourself. Be a part of their advocacy as well as advocating for whatever personally messes with you and personally has an effect on your life. Of course, it's absolutely legitimate to say, Trump's administration and legislation is affecting me in these ways. This is how I'm personally harmed. This is how I'm personally affected. But I think we also need to recognise that we have to look at the way other people are affected as well, and we have to be a part of their fight too. And there's a lot of crappy stuff going on right now in the UK. There's a lot of shit happening. We are literally having our National Health Service dismantled in front of our fucking faces. There's all kinds of awful policies going on that are affecting lower income families, single parent working class families. I mean, the poverty is ridiculous. People are going to their kids' schools to charge their phones and wash their clothes because they don't have the electricity in their homes when they are trying to look after kids and make sure the kids get showered and the kids get whatever they need. So it's a tough fucking time in England right now. A lot of the policies of our administration have absolutely ransacked and raided the economic prosperity in this country. And Brexit, don't even get me started on that. That's a video in and of itself. I could have a total meltdown over that. So there's a lot going on right now, and I think it's really important that we don't just think about what affects us and what we're angry about on a personal level, but also think about the way others are affected in ways that we might not personally be. And that's really important. I do see in this time of rampant individualism that a lot of people who are marginalised in some way are only focusing on the way in which they are marginalised, and they're only really advocating for the type of marginalisation that directly affects them. I think that's really a shame, because if you're willing to be vocal and you're willing to oppose and you're willing to be active and you're willing to be open with that activism, then it's great for you to be able to advocate also for things that don't directly necessarily concern you or have a bearing on your life. And I think that moving from that individualistic side of things, where you're only thinking about you and what's bad for you, to the more collectivistic side of things, where you're thinking about everybody who's affected and you're wanting to advocate for other kinds of people and other kinds of problems as well, is the infinitely more spiritual way, I think, of doing things and approaching things. So if you notice you've only been talking about how policies affect you or how culture affects you, then also listen to yourself in that moment and think, wow, it's been about me for quite a bit. Let me think also about others that are affected, and maybe if anything that I'm doing is actually contributing to the way that policy or culture is affecting those people. Maybe I'm stepping on some toes and I didn't realise in my fight to advocate for whatever is troubling me or whatever directly affects me. And I'm not saying that, marginalised people need to take on the brunt of all of that or whatever, but sometimes there's a selfishness in the way that somebody's marginalisation makes them approach politics. It's almost all about them, and it doesn't tend to be about what anybody else is going through. And we have to remember, even when we do feel marginalised or even when we do feel attacked by legislation, that there are other ways in which we are privileged and in which we are strengthened and we can help and we can be of use. Any legislation that affects me as a woman is legislation that I want to vehemently oppose and I want to be deeply involved with. But at the same time, I need to recognise that my position as a white, able-bodied woman puts me in a place of potentially being able to be more active or more vocal on behalf of women who are going to end up having less access to services or whatever the case may be. So I have to think about it in almost a less self-pitying way. And in that moment, I have to think to myself, okay, if this legislation is affecting me and, you know, it chances to affect my life really negatively, then think about how it's going to affect this single working class black mother over here in this deprived area of London, right? So it's thinking like that. It's thinking more about us as a collective and how different people are affected in ways that might not personally touch us so much, but we can still put ourselves in another person's shoes. That's a very spiritual thing to do. The light in this video is just fucking giving me a headache. What do you want from me? I very often end up advising my clients to look at the timeline of their life, at the occasions when they really rose to the challenge, when they were experiencing really tough times, but they actually inspired themselves to keep moving forward. I've noticed with a number of the readings that I've given over the last year or two, this kind of advice tends to come up for a lot of different clients. It's really interesting. It's almost like the cards are urging a person to look at how strong they are and how capable they are. And you can see that through the evidence that you can collect from your personal timeline, your history of being alive on this planet. Going back to what I was saying about the danger of talking about these kinds of things in a way that amplifies our sense of weakness and helplessness, we really need to move away from that. So whenever you are centering on your apathy, your sense of inability to change the situation, if you're looking at something that's happening on the news that is fucking appalling and you feel like you're just one little person and you just cannot do anything about this and you want to crawl under the covers and hide until it's all over, look at the timeline of your life on this planet so far. Look at all the times when you rose to the fucking occasion, when you felt like you had no resources, no help, when you felt like you were at the edge, you were on the edge, you were teetering on the brink. There's times, I'm sure, for a lot of people that watch my channel that they barely fucking came back from. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that watch my channel know people who didn't fucking make it, you know, who did break or who did kill themselves. And we have to understand sometimes how strong we have to be to live with the burden of human consciousness and to live amidst all of this and to recognise that there is no safety net, that we can die in poverty, that we can die of sickness and disease and that our governments will not care for us, that we can see white supremacists marching around on the streets in our country, terrorising people, that we can watch people raising swastikas, hoisting them high and proud like it's no big fucking deal. Business as usual, guys. Swastikas ahoy. During those times, we need to know exactly how strong we've been. We need to take that under advisement. So I would urge you to think about all the shit you've been through, all the storms you've fucking weathered in your lifetime. Think about your strength. Think about your endurance, your resilience, your perseverance under pressure. You have shown it. You have shown it before and you can show it again now. Do not let yourself or anyone else convince you that you can't do something, that you can't be strong, that you can't get up and take some form of decisive action, that you can't shift your mentality and shift your action on its axis so it goes from stasis to momentum. You can do that. You've fucking done that. You've done that already. And that is sometimes what we need to recognise. We need to look at our own stories and say, I am a tough fucking cookie. I am really tough. I have weathered storms. I am not going to let anyone or anything, including myself, convince me otherwise. You have to be prepared to understand just how capable and just how potent you are. And actually, there's a lot of messaging to the contrary all around you at the moment. And there are powers at work, there are forces at work, whether they are individual, whether they are governmental, whatever it is, whether they are cultural, that want you to believe in your own ineptitude and your own weakness. Don't believe it. Don't fucking believe it. You've got the evidence in the timeline of your life to understand just how potent and how capable you can be. So don't be tricked into believing any other narrative. If you are anxious, if you're feeling very low about the situation, if it's really getting on top of you, get it out, write about it, talk about it, sweat it out of you, do a workout. Sweating stuff out of you, the tension and the negative emotion is so much more legitimate than you would think. It's an amazing way of doing it. If you're in love with someone right now, make love to them. Get it out any way that you can. If you have a therapist, go talk to your therapist. If you have friends that you lean on, that you vent to, go and talk to them. If you want to start a blog, start a blog. If you want to paint a picture, paint a picture. Go outside and draw something on the road in chalk, you know, get your inner child involved. Get it out of you in any way that you can. Don't sit with it. Don't steep yourself in it. It's not going to be helpful. It deserves an exit, and you can give it a glorious exit. Don't tell yourself that there's no point in doing anything unless you can do everything. Don't tell yourself that unless you can do every single thing that's on your list that you want to do, there's no point in doing anything at all. You know, like I said before, just making your beliefs and your intentions visible to someone who might really need to see where you stand with things and that you support them in their struggle. That is so much more significant than you can ever understand. It really is. And I've learned that from having a public platform. The times that I've spoken out on things or posted about things, I've retweeted articles about things, and someone has come along underneath and said, thank you for that. That means a lot to me because that directly is my struggle. And I really appreciate that. That makes me feel great. I feel so empowered that you have said this. And you can be that person for someone on your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed right now who needs to know. They need to know that yes, people are taking up for their struggle, and yes, they are seen and they are valued and they are heard. And like I said, small acts of kindness can be political. Don't ever tell yourself that those things don't matter. They do matter, just as it matters to speak up when you see injustice, when you hear injustice. It matters to not let people feel emboldened to say racist shit when they are a guest in your home, for example, or when they are out in the street. It matters, and it matters just as much to make sure that you are helping people feel included and feel safe, who might not now currently at this point in time feel included or safe in any fucking way, in any cell of their body. Do not give in to apathy, and always plan for the eventualities that concern you. And I'm not talking about in a really, you know, tensely anxious way where you are misusing your imagination and you're catastrophizing to fuck and you're thinking about all these terrible things that could happen and you are inventing the different ways that they're going to happen and you're, you know, disempowered by that. Not in that way. I mean, like, if you're worried that something is going to happen and it keeps bugging you and you're thinking, God, that could really happen on my street or in my neighborhood, or it could really start to go this way, plan. Think about what you are going to do if that eventuality occurs. What is your plan? And that can be very empowering. That can be very revitalizing. That can put you right back in the seat of your power again. Like I said before, don't underestimate the value of physical community or online community. Don't underestimate the value of planning together what you can do and talking about how you feel. There's totally a space for talking about how you feel, but there's also so much opportunity to be able to plan in a way where you feel supported as well and you feel like you're doing it together with people. If you need that, then that's okay. And don't forget that it is not your job to make anybody else feel better about the views that they hold or the decisions that they've made. If you need to get away from someone who is spewing rhetoric towards you that you know is having a directly harmful effect on you and people in your life, or you're seeing on the news people being so harmfully affected by that rhetoric and by the legislation that accompanies it and the shift in culture that accompanies it, don't feel like you have to make that person somehow feel better about what's coming out of their mouth. You're allowed to step away. You're allowed to say that you don't want to have the conversation. But I think when it comes to conversing with people that have views that you know are detrimental to so many people who are not like that person is othering. That person is laying the blame at the doors of others who they don't know, who they don't want to know, who they disrespect innately. When you have an opportunity to have a conversation with someone like that, sometimes it is the appropriate thing to do. And we do need to recognise that unless we engage with people sometimes on that personal level, we are not making steps towards helping someone to understand something they might be missing out on. I've had conversations with people before that I really didn't want to have that ended with me coming to more of an intense understanding of their point of view and why they hold that point of view, and them coming to an understanding of the fact that there are other ways of thinking outside of this very, you know, rigid way of thinking that they've adopted, and giving them access maybe to new resources, or just helping them to understand that wanting to advocate for human rights for everyone is not a slight against them, and it's not an attack on them. It's not something they should feel threatened by, you know. Sometimes it's worth having those conversations. Sometimes it takes too much of a toll on your emotional well-being, and you need to make the call. And you also need to make the call on when you need to draw a line in the sand and actually be away from people in your life, whether they are friends or family members who are talking about things in a way that you just feel is so other to what you thought they believed and who you thought they were. And I know that there are a lot of people who've had to make that kind of decision, and it's been, you know, hugely jarring for those people. And I think a lot of people have been surprised by the way others have started to think, or the beliefs that others have been coming out with. I know for my part that there's a few people I know that are talking very differently now than they were talking a few years ago. It's interesting how this stuff is so infectious, and it does seep in, and you know, it is populism. It's straight up populism. And it, you know, that it has a habit of being infectious, and it's scary how people that even a few short years ago would have recognised the danger in this rhetoric and the inherent racism and superiority and supremacy behind it, now find themselves caught up in it. That is scary, and I empathise with people who find themselves in the position of watching that happen to people that they love or did love or were close to or are close to. I think that people who hold views that are inherently racist, inherently persecutory and prejudice and dangerous to people are almost relying on those around them to prop up their views or give them a pass on their views, make them feel comfortable with their views. You know, I think that kind of reminds me of that hat that's like a parody of the Make America Great Again hat, and it says make racism wrong again. And I think that I get that hat is a parody hat and it's funny and, you know, it's a good idea, but the sentiment behind it is absolutely solid. Make racism wrong again. We need to ensure that we are not emboldening people in our lives by giving them some kind of a pass when they say abhorrent shit. And so do keep that in mind as well, because there's nothing spiritual about keeping the peace to the extent where somebody leaves your family barbecue or some kind of, you know, public interaction with you in the playground or wherever you are, picking your kids up or in the grocery store. There's nothing spiritual about making that person feel safe and advocated in the views that they have just expounded about people. When you see blatant racism, blatant misogyny, blatant prejudice, the blatant advocation of the dehumanization of others, you can feel completely and wholly appropriate in taking a stand against that. You know, let that person know that it's not just every single place in public you can say those things and not be questioned on them. Let that person feel unsettled as they make others feel unsettled in their views. Not with threat of violence, you know, or anything like that, but let that person know that, like, no, you don't advocate for that, and you're not just going to stand there and say, yeah, I guess so, you know, maybe. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. There's nothing spiritual about making somebody feel comfortable with using the N-word, or feel comfortable with saying, yeah, those people deserve to have their kids taken away from them, or feel comfortable to say, you know, women don't deserve to have access to their bodies or whatever. Whenever someone spiritual takes a stand on something and speaks out about something, you'll inevitably have this backlash from a certain cross-section of people who will look at that person and go, oh, that's very spiritual, isn't it? That's very spiritual. The judgment that you're spewing out against Trump supporters, oh, that's very spiritual. You know what? People that don't understand what it is to live spiritually and to have a spiritual practice will always equate being spiritual with being silent and being docile and being very lamb-like and very subservient and wanting to please everyone and just send white light to everyone, MAGA hat or no MAGA hat. Don't convince yourself that you've got to toe that fucking line just because that's the pigeonhole somebody else has put you into. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye for now. I think I have a very, very small cross-section of Trump supporters in my audience. I do not support your views, and you have to understand that. If you want to stick around and watch my content, that's fine. But really, I've got no love for 45, and I've got no love for what's going on over there, okay? It would be very easy for me to sit there, just like 45 has done, and say, well, you know, there were some good and bad people on both sides. But actually, the truth speaks volumes. What we are seeing and reading and hearing and actually witnessing footage of and witnessing testimony of is very different to that. I'm not prepared to say there was some very bad people on both sides. No, that's not a balanced view of what's actually occurring. And somewhere deep down in your heart, you probably do know that on some level. But do play nice in the comments, and thank you for listening to some of my thoughts about emboldening ourselves, being strong, taking action, and not allowing ourselves to be drenched and steeped in apathy. That's not how we're going to get through this, and it's not how we're going to get things done. Anybody with any ideas, anything they want to say, you know, please do put it down in the comments. Embolden each other, empower each other, really kind of talk about what the process has been like for you. What are you doing in terms of activism? What do you think is good to do? If you want to post links to petitions and things like that, they will be sent into my review list, so they won't be published underneath the video straight away, but I will get to them, I will look at them, and if they are relevant and they are on point, I will definitely release them. So if there's any petitions you think people should sign, any groups you think people could get involved with, really good community outreach work going on that you're involved with, you know, share it. Please do share it, and share anything to do with groups online where people are coming together to talk about how to use their energy, their time, or their money. Thank you so much for listening to these ideas. So much love and strength and power to you all. Blessed be, honey bunnies.